Hello friends, welcome back to WizKid. Friends, you must be familiar with the Tic Tac game, also known as Noughts and Crosses. I'm sure you must be wanting to win this game all the time. So in this video, I will share some tips and tricks to win this game. And I guarantee you, if you follow my tips and tricks, you shall never lose a game of Tic Tac in your lifetime. So let's begin.
So friends, this video is divided into two main parts. You play first or your opponent plays first. Let's assume that you are always X and your opponent is always O. So let's start with the first part of our video, that is you play first. When you play first, you've got the following options. Either you put your first X in a corner, either you put your first X in an edge, or you put your first X in the center. Now let me show you what are these edges and all. These four are corners and these are the edges in which I am drawing circles, and this is the center in which I drew a cross. So let's begin. Now I told you that you've got three options. So you put your first X in a corner, and let's assume that your opponent starts with putting his first O in an edge. The best strategy you can use is that you put your X in the center. If you put your first X in the center, you've got better chances to win. So your opponent will see that you're making a line, then he will block you, and then you block him. And see, you have made two non-block lines. Your opponent can only block one, and you win. Let's see in the second case what might happen. You put your first X in a corner, and your opponent starts by putting his first O in a corner. Best strategy, put your first X in another corner. Your opponent will see that you are making one line and will block you. Of course, you shall block him, and see, you've created two non-block lines. Your opponent can only block one, and you win. Let's see in the third case what might happen. You put your first X in a corner, and your opponent responds by putting his first O in the center. There are only two strategies that can help you win this game. Either you put your first X in the opposite corner, or you put it in an edge that does not touch the first X. In this video, we shall only analyze the case when you put your first X in the corner. This is a simpler strategy, so that's why I'm telling you this one. See, you put your second X in an opposite corner. Then you can only win when your opponent puts his second O in a corner. If your opponent chooses an edge for his second move, then you can only force a draw. I am not teaching you the draw strategy because there is no strategy for it. You just need to block him and continue playing. The game will surely end in a draw if you don't do random moves. So let's see. Your opponent puts his second O in a corner. And then, of course, you shall block him. And you've created two non-block lines. Your opponent can only block one. And you win. Now let's see. When you put your first X in the center, you can only win when your opponent chooses an edge for his first move. If your opponent uses a corner, then you can only force a draw. Let's see what might happen in this case. See, your opponent will choose an edge for his first move. Then what you can do is, you put your second X in a corner, any corner. Then your opponent will block you. Of course, you should block him. You've got two non-block lines. Your opponent can only block one. And you win. Friends, if you get the chance of playing first, do not put your first X in an edge because there are many combinations in this and you need a lot of strategies. So, doing that will be a little more time consuming and will practically confuse you, leading to your disadvantage, and you might lose. So, when you play first, please do not put your first X in an edge. Now, we come to the second part of our video. That is when your opponent plays first. When your opponent plays first, he can put his first X in a corner, an edge, or in the center. Let's see in all the cases. Let's see your opponent starts by putting his first O in a corner. Do not put your first X in an edge or corner because you might give your opponent a chance to win from the strategy described earlier. So, there is only one safe option. Put your first X in the center. You cannot win, but you can force a draw. Now, pay attention to your opponent's second move. In his second move, your opponent, if he chooses near edges and near corners to his first O, just block his line and continue playing. The game will end in a draw. But if your opponent chooses an edge that does not touch the first O, and if he chooses the corner opposite to his first toe, I will tell you the strategy how to use it. So let's see if your opponent puts his second O in the opposite corner. Let's see what might happen in this case. Do not put your second X in a corner because you might give him a chance to win by using the strategy described earlier. So put your second X in an edge. That is the safer option. Then just continue playing and the game will end in a draw. Let's see what might happen in the center case. Your opponent puts his first O in the center. Now, just put your first X in a corner and continue playing. The game will end in a draw. But do not put your first X in an edge because you might give your opponent a chance to win using the strategy described earlier. So just put your first X in a corner and continue playing. The game will end in a draw. Now, let's see what might happen in the edge case. What if your opponent chooses an edge for his first move? The safest strategy is to put your first X in a corner next to the first O. So let's see the three versions of this game. Version A, your opponent chooses his second O in the center. Now you just block his line. Now comes the critical moment. If your opponent chooses a corner that does not block your potential lines, you shall win. If your opponent puts his over here, then you just block his line and you have two non-block lines and you win. But if your opponent chooses the opposite corner that blocks your potential lines, you can just block his line and continue playing. The game will end in a draw. Let's see the version B. If your opponent uses the opposite corner for his second move. In this case, you shall win this game. All you need to do is block his line. He shall block you. You shall block him. And see, you've created two non-block lines. Your opponent can only block one and you win. Let's see what might happen in the version C case. Your opponent puts his first O in an edge. You put your first X in a corner next to the first O. Now, if your opponent uses another edge for his second move, now you might be tempted to put your second X in a corner, which might be a mistake because you will give your opponent a chance by winning with two non-block lines. Avoid that. What you can do is, let me draw my X in a better way. Let's see what might happen in this case. Your opponent uses his second move in an edge. You need to put your second X in the center so that you block the two potential lines of the X's. Now, this game will most likely end in a draw if your opponent makes random moves. So, I'm not going to talk about this now. Now, let's see another case. Your opponent puts his first O in an edge. You put your X next to it. Your opponent is not likely to use a corner because it doesn't give him any advantage. So your opponent is not likely to use a corner. But by chance, if he uses, let's see what might happen. Your opponent will not use his second O next to his first O because it gives him no advantage at all. So he might put his second O in this corner or in this corner. In the both cases, this thing is same. Alright, he uses his second O here. He is not likely, but he might. Let's see. Now, you might put your X in a wrong place. Because, see, if you just by mistake put your X over here, your opponent will make two non-block lines. So, to avoid this, now let's see what might happen in this case. Your opponent uses a corner for his next move. Then what you might do is that you might put your X in a wrong place. To avoid this, just put your second X in the center or in the edge next to the opponent's second O. Then the game will end in a draw. So these were the 8 tic-tac-toe strategies used in this game.
So friends, I hope you liked this video. If so, don't forget to share it with your family members and friends. Also subscribe to this YouTube channel. I will see you very soon with my next video. Bye. Take care.